Welcome to K6 Wellness Revolution, where we believe health is worth fighting for. This podcast focuses on all things related to natural health, wellness, and vibrant living. We know your time is valuable, and I'm honored that you're spending some of it here. So get ready, because the Wellness Revolution starts right now. Welcome to the K6 Wellness Revolution podcast. My name is Sharon. I'm the owner of K6 Wellness Center here in Dallas, Texas, and I'll be your host as we discuss all things health and wellness. Today, I'm so excited to be speaking with Bob Eanes, the owner of VeraDyne and the creator of the Avatar ElectroDermal Screening System. Hi, Bob. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Sharon. Thanks for, I said this before, but thanks. Thank you very much for having me do this with you.
This is exciting. This is like a bucket list type thing for me. I always like to seek you out when I can for a good conversation. I learned so much. So today we're going to talk about, I'm going to call it electrodermal screening. And I know it goes by many names, and I think we'll kind of get into that. But for me as a naturopath in the energy field, functional wellness, there are a lot of people who muscle test. It's age old. There are people who do all kinds of different tests, and I love your system, and it is definitely a cornerstone for us in our information gathering process. So I really just want to kind of have you talk to us, and let's kind of start at the beginning. Like, what is this? How does it work? And how did it get going?
Okay. So, I was thinking about this before, in the last couple of days about what I'd say. And I've been doing this a while. So the Avatar, this device that I manufacture has been on the market for 35 years.
Oh,
wow. It's a long time. Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. And I'd had some involvement with a different machine prior to that for a year or two. So, I've kind of been around this stuff a while. And over the course of decades, certainly people have come to me and asked me, what do you do and what is it and how does it work? And actually, it's not the easiest thing to always explain, because it starts off kind of with this notion of acupuncture and meridians, which that in itself is kind of an odd thing. Mm-hmm. So why don't we just start there, and I'll try and make this as simple, but also try and explain it in a way that somebody can get it, hopefully.
Love it.
So acupuncture has been around for thousands of years, and it's known that indigenous cultures around the globe have, known about these meridians, these energy channels in the body on all the different continents, in Australia, Africa, South America, Asia, North America, and so on. And certainly acupuncture and all of this has developed more in the Eastern world than it has anywhere else. But, even Native Americans knew about these meridians. So what are meridians, and what's really going on here? Well, the reality is nobody knows. I mean, we know it somewhat anecdotally. We know that when you stimulate meridian points in certain locations on the body, that there's an outcome that happens, not coincidentally. Something actually happens. And you can do it with a needle. Some people do it electrically. Some people do it with, massaging like auricular points in the ear and so on. But it's kind of the same basic thing. Somehow you're doing something to stimulate these meridians, and out of that,
but also, not to interrupt, but also they are electroconductive pathways. Like, they've been measured and mapped across different fields as, there is a current here does conduct, right?
Yes. Well, through this yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. I don't know if there's something going on out there in the field of science that has mapped out electrically the meridians outside of this technology that I make, but but the stuff's around. Okay.
Sure.
So what is a meridian? Nobody knows. And this is really where the mystery starts, kind of taking foot. It just, nobody knows what they are. There's some form of energy that has at least a couple of different purposes. One is that you move energy through the body, through these channels. And the thing that's kind of interesting is the channels are consistent from one person to the next, regardless of male, female, size, weight, age, or anything else. And these channels have a real roadmap on where they are in the body. For example, on the index finger on this side is the large intestine meridian. Can you see that right along there?
Right.
And on this side here is considered in what we do the lung, although, yeah, that's kind of the same in Eastern philosophy as well. But, but what is really going on underneath that? What's that energy? What type is it? It seems to have electrical characteristics, but it doesn't show up electrically. In other words, if you do an MRI of somebody, if you do an X-ray, if you do a electromagnetic scan of somebody, meridians just don't show up.
Right.
So again, what are they? And some people believe they're, subtle electromagnetics. Who knows? Who knows? But one thing from our standpoint, what you mentioned is important, is that on some level, these meridians conduct electricity differently than the tissue would normally.
Right.
So, for example, if you take a reading on the finger here, where the actual meridian point is, like right, down along here by the joint, the electrical conductivity there is going to be substantially different than where it would be mid-joint, between the two joints, bone right there.
And I would encourage our listeners to actually watch this on YouTube or Rumble so you can see this, because exactly right. You can move with your system, and you can find that conductivity just goes away. You can't measure it anymore.
Yeah. So acupuncture, kind of getting back a little bit, acupuncture was really based around therapy, not around diagnostics or around testing. Even traditional Chinese medicine typically used other measurements like pulse diagnosis and palpations and other things to really do their diagnostics. And the meridian points were all about therapeutic usage. All right. So then sometime around 1948 or something like that, a couple of French doctors kind of stumbled on something prior to Dr. Reinhold Voll. And they found out that when you run electrical current at low voltage, where these acupuncture meridian points are, it did very peculiar but very consistent things. And Voll, so now let's talk about Reinhold Voll. So Dr. Voll was a medical doctor in Germany. He was considered to be one of the top diagnosticians in all of Europe. And people would travel to him from all over Europe to kind of a beautiful hot springs resort area called Baden-Baden. It's in the Black Forest region in Germany. I've been there a few times. Very pretty. Old Roman emperors used to go there in the summer when it was stiflingly hot in Rome, and they would spend their summers up in Baden-Baden. So it's an ancient area. And Voll had a hospital. He owned a small hospital, not just a clinic. They were doing operations, and they had a large staff before this technology came along. But what made Voll really, really famous and really, sought after were his diagnostic skills. So he had a couple things going for him. One is he was a very brilliant man. He had an extremely high IQ, had a photographic memory, could literally recite pages of text out of any of the medical books, texts that he'd ever read. And he was a bit of an arrogant guy about that. The guy was really quite brilliant. When he would do his diagnostics, what really set him apart from other practitioners is he would do all his normal procedures. And, you think about it, in the late 1940s, early 1950s, what were they doing? They would do their stethoscope and temperature and palpations and look at your, look in your mouth with the, tongue depressor and all that. And they could do blood work. They could, grow cultures. They could do some simple tests. Even back then, X-ray was just starting to become available. So what did they have? The technology was kind of lacking. But Voll, what really set him apart is he had a very intuitive sense about him, and he used something called a pendulum. So if you don't know what that is, it's people that are very intuitive. They'll hold a pendulum in their finger and it'll spin, and how it spins kind of gives them insight on answers, yes or no, basically. Well, he was brilliant with it. And it really did give him an edge in terms of diagnosis, where he could look where other people couldn't. Problem was, his doctors were coming to him from all over to learn what he did, and he found that very few could pick up that side of things. I don't think that that's something that people can't learn. I think it's more a matter of trust than anything. Some people seem to just gravitate towards it better. They just easier for them to latch on to it. So looking for something that could kind of bridge the gap between, you could say, this kind of intuitive side versus the more, kind of hardcore analytical side of things, he was out looking, and he stumbled on these two French doctors that had developed this early version technology. And I think for him, the lights went on instantly. He had some background in acupuncture, so the meridians made sense to him. And then he sees this device where you run electricity through it, and he saw the potential instantly. And that's really where it went. The French guys just kind of fell to the wayside. Voll adopted this. And they, one thing wonderful about German practitioners and scientists is they're very methodical. They don't take a step unless they can really prove it out. So in this case, they were, everything they did about this was done scientifically. And, you think about it. This guy had his own hospital. So when they're looking at this technology, everything that they looked at on it had to be compared to hardcore medical science and medical data. They were doing exploratory surgeries. They could see what was going on. They were looking at the lab work that they did have. So this wasn't just kind of guesswork. They were backing it up with real science. And from that, they developed the early version Voll machines. And they look kind of like, hang on a second, I'll see if I can kind of give you a sense of what this looks like. You ready for this?
Yeah, I'm ready. Lay it on us. Again, we encourage people watch this. Don't just listen to it. And this is the EAV machine, the Electro Acupuncture According to Voll, correct? That you're going to show us?
Uh-huh.
And some people still call this EAV testing, which, it's developed names.
So this is an old, so this is called a dermatron, and this is what the early version Voll machines looked like. They were analog meters, and really quite simple technology. And I'll explain a little bit more about what the technology is in just a second here. And by the way, Voll looked like, there's Dr. Voll.
Brilliant Dr. Voll.
Yeah, really was quite a brilliant man. So, yeah, and by the way, one thing that I've had, in my career in this, I've had the opportunity to meet some very, very cool people. And one of them is a guy named Dr. Andreas Marx.
I love it when you talk about him.
Have you ever met him?
No.
Oh, wow. He does. Yeah, he does classes occasionally. He lives in North Carolina now, and he does small group classes occasionally. Andreas is a character. I mean, he grew up in Germany. He was a rock star in Germany, not just in a band. I mean, he toured with like the Oak Ridge Boys here in the United States. He recorded with Buddy Holly. I mean, the guy was really remarkable. He's a great musician. But at one point in his life, a buddy of his had gotten involved and had bought a dermatron from Voll, and he told Andreas about it. And Andreas says, I need to see this, and off he went. And he became a naturopath and an acupuncturist. And he actually worked with Reinhold Voll. He didn't just take a couple of classes with him. So anything that I'm saying about Voll is passed on by somebody that was around back in the day. Mm-hmm. So anyway, back to, let's see, what have I covered so far? So you have Voll, So in the early years, the usage of this machine was really all about testing different meridian points. Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here again and show you a little bit about that.
Well, and I want to hear too, like, and maybe you're planning on talking about it, how Dr. Voll discovered the value of putting a remedy in the field of a person and creating that remedy, that therapeutic response, and measuring it.
Are you talking about the story about how that kind of came around? Is that what you're asking about?
Is it true or is it lore?
It's true. I mean, at least that's what I've gotten from Andreas and a few other people who were, a couple of the other German doctors that I've met through Andreas. Yeah, it really happened. And
so we're looking at the actual Avatar system, which is your system. And this is how we take our measurements. This is the updated software.
Yeah.
As opposed to the Dermatron.
Correct. Yeah. So this is a little farther down the road, but I just want to kind of show you this on this hand are different meridian points. You can see the dots on here that are points that Voll used for measurements. And, it's really kind of cool how this works. So this point over here, the one that's flashing is related to the lymphatic system. It's called the lymphatic control point. And along that branch, that meridian, this is the lymphatic meridian on the right hand, are these different points. And if you look at them, it tells you what they're about down here at the bottom. So this first one here at the kind of up near the thumbnail is related to the palatine tonsils. So those are the tonsils that are taken out of kids occasionally and so on when they're small. The next point is related to lymphatic drainage of the ear here. The next one is what we call the control point, which is kind of general for the entire lymphatic meridian. And then the next one is related to the tubal tonsils, which are lower in the throat. And then the next point, and it goes on and on and on. So it's not just one point that's the entire meridian. It's that along with points that are specific functionally for what's going on in that part of the body, like the lymphatic system. Or if we were on the, let's say the heart meridian here along the inside of the little finger, we can branch along that and look at, the first point is related to the pulmonary valve and the subendocardial lymphatic system and so on. And here's the cardiac plexus. So I'll stop sharing here for a minute and come back to that. So the reason I wanted to show you that is because in the early days, Voll practitioners just used this for testing meridian points, and that was it. And that was a leap technologically for them where they could have somebody sit down and they could start testing meridian points and get a real understanding of how the different parts of the body were functioning. Were they in balance, out of balance?
So you're going to demonstrate taking the reading?
Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
So a normal reading, like if I were taking it on my lymphatic system, I could actually test this with a stylus. It looks like kind of like a pen with a brass tip on it and a wire that's connected to the device. And so I tested my heart meridian, and it's a good solid reading. So for all of you out there listening, when you're testing, Sharon does this a little bit more of an advanced technique called ECM or Ellen Cutler method ECM, where you kind of work with the fact that the meridians are all connected. So she tests one point for the entire procedure and kind of accesses all the other meridians through that. And that's fine. Voll tested the actual meridian points on the different fingers and toes. So if we were taking a reading on the lymphatic meridian, I'll do that on mine here. The reading comes up, and here it stays steady at around 50. And that's kind of a normal, solid reading. And what that means is that readings that fall kind of, and you can follow the mouse here, kind of in this green zone, anywhere from around 46 all the way up to 58. That's kind of your sweet spot.
Right.
That would indicate that part of the body, that whatever you're testing, that meridian is functioning properly. And it's not just the meridians in balance, it's also that physical part of the body is also working properly. So if we test, for example, the large intestine point here, so that's, follow the mouse again, that's this point here where it's circling around off of the index finger.
Right.
So if I take a reading on that, well, I'll be darned.
You're good.
Yeah, I'm kind of doing too many things here at once to hold it steady. But that's still a good solid reading. It comes up to around 56 and kind of holds itself there nicely. And again, that indicates that my large intestine at this time is functioning properly. Now, I'll fake a reading. Let's say that I got a reading that was high, like up in this zone.
Right. In the red zone.
Okay. That would indicate what we call an inflammatory process, or something is irritating that beyond the point where it's just a nagging irritation. It's something actually is going on there.
Right.
Some kind of a stressor. And it could be any number of things. It could be a disease process. It could be a toxin. It could be some kind of a physical issue. It could be anything.
Bad tacos.
Like tacos.
You never know.
Somebody from Texas that's in that land of tacos says it could be tacos. That's just not right. But what it could be is, you know, what's important to us and what was important to the early practitioners in this field is that showed inflammation. That showed something was going on there. The higher it is, the more of a degree of an inflammatory process. So just for all of you out there, inflammation is the way of the body compensating for an issue. So, you know, when things are in balance and working properly, you get a nice reading in the green zone. But if something happens, like if a pathogen enters the scene and starts to do damage, then initially it might cause an irritation, which would be in kind of this yellow zone here between 58 and 65. But if it starts to become a real issue where it's, you know, causing actual physical damage and the body's having to compensate for it, compensate by possibly sending out an immune response to kill the whatever parasite or bacterial infection, possibly increasing blood flow into that area. All those are part of an inflammatory response, but that's just indicative of something's going on there and the body is dealing with it.
Right.
Now, over the course of time, if the body can't fight off that infection, the readings become low readings where, hang on a second, this is not as easy. Stop. So let's say I got a reading like sorry guys, I'm moving here.
You got too much vitality, Bob.
No, I'm just not in a position where I'm
good enough.
Yeah. But when you see low readings, and in truth, you don't really see low readings very often because that means things have gotten kind of bad. It's getting past the point. Exactly. You know, it's gotten to the point where the body can't compensate. It doesn't have the immune response. It doesn't have the energy. It's kind of losing the battle, you could say.
Yeah. That's what I always tell people. I love that you put like the traffic signal system, like green is good, yellow's, cautionary, and red is that stress response. But people tend to think, well, the higher it goes, the worse it is. And it's like, well, the body's trying to do something, but when you drop down into that purple zone, or when you drop down, especially like below 40, it's like, oh, that's real. That's not a good sign. Good outcomes need to be priority here because it's getting more difficult. There's a definite loss of vitality, I find, when you get those. And it's not very common, thank goodness, at least in my office.
You see a lot of difficult cases. Difficult not because they're difficult patients, but because they're tough cases. They're, something's going on that's serious. It's, been neglected, or people haven't been able to really find a solution. And in cases where you see those low readings, it could be something like a long-term viral issue, like hepatitis C, or Epstein-Barr, or AIDS, that kind of stuff, where it's just constantly attacking the body, and the body just loses its ability to fight. All right. So at one point in time, Voll. So again, backing up just a little bit here. So Voll doctors initially just tested points, and they really mapped out the whole system of points. They would when they looked at like that palatine tonsil, that was a point that was always inflamed when they had a child or an adult that had, a tonsil issue. And they can see that in the back of the throat with the tongue depressor. You can see that swollen area, and it would always show up on that meridian point. When you've got an issue with, a bad mitral valve or, tricuspid valve, there are points that they discovered that matched up to that, and it always showed up that way. Okay.
But then what? So what do you do when you get a point, shows up bad? What was the answer? Was it, congratulations, now we have a map of your crappy physiology?
Well, okay. So you want to get into remedy testing. All right, got it. All right. So in Voll's hospital, one of the doctors at Voll's clinic, one of the medical doctors there, an older gentleman, had a heart condition. He had a mitral valve issue. Now, back in the early 1950s, they weren't doing open heart surgery and replacing mitral valves. Okay.
Right.
So how they were handling it is he was taking kind of old school German herbal remedies and homeopathic remedies, and it was kind of keeping him in, balanced shape. I mean, he was okay. Every month he would come in and they would test him on their Voll device to see how he was doing. Well, on one occasion, he comes in, he sits down, they start testing, and they test his heart and his circulation meridians. And surprisingly, the meridians were balanced. Now, this was very perplexing because they knew that he had an issue. They also tested his mitral valve point, and it was also balanced. And they're wondering, what is going on here? Even in the past, you're doing your remedies, but even in the past, there's always been a certain amount of issue. There's a certain amount of high reading. Okay? Right. So they had another doctor come in and test him, same readings. They changed machines, same readings. So whatever was going on was really there. And this really stumped them. So they finally said, let's go have a bite to eat, So they went to lunch and they come back, and this is on kind of a blustery, kind of cloudy day in the Black Forest. It's kind of cool outside, and just keep that in mind. And the doctor that's being tested, gentleman with the heart condition, sits down and he says, why don't we test you one more time? So now they test him, and his readings are what they would normally expect to see. And now they're even more confused because why was it higher? Was it something he ate? Was it morning versus afternoon? And finally, Dr. Voll realized that earlier the gentleman had been wearing his top coat when he was being tested. As it got warmer in the day and in the office, he took it off when he came back to be tested again. In the breast pocket of his top coat, he was carrying all of his homeopathic and herbal remedies. So somehow those remedies were affecting the meridians. That was key. And man, again, the lights went on for Voll. And he realized that when you brought something into the field, we're talking about something called the energetic field, which is kind of like an area around the patient, but it really extends out kind of forever. But when it's brought close, it has an influence on the meridians. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so they developed what they call remedy testing. All right. And the way they did this, I'm going to switch to sharing again here. So bear with me, guys.
And what I love about the remedy testing, and even though it started with the homeopathics, is that now we can remedy test with all kinds of stuff, with nutrition, with amino acids, with homeopathics, with colors, with minerals, nutraceuticals, pharmaceuticals, to see how things work like we think they work.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm showing you here, this is an old photograph, but this kind of gives you an idea of what these practitioners using these devices were actually, how they were setting up their clinic. So they would have their Voll device, and you can kind of see an old Voll device up in the upper left area of the photo. It's kind of distorted at this magnification. But you see these cabinets that were built. These were custom cabinets, and in them they would have these what are called test kits.
Right.
Now, test kits were basically boxes that had these little glass-sealed ampules of different types of remedies. And they would have, whole listings of these things. So they would have a whole, library of different virus test ampules and bacteria and heavy metals. And
we still have those today.
There
are a lot of people who still use them. I used to have boxes and boxes of them, and I've tossed them all.
Yeah. And what's happened is that, over the course of time, the companies that used to be involved in this, there were a couple of them in Germany. One of them was Staufen Pharma, and they specialize in making these test kits, and they were expensive. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like
Still
seriously expensive. Yeah, they still are. But when practitioners, you know, these docs would have like a closet with shelves built with dozens and dozens of these kind of flattish boxes, and they would have like all kinds of test ampules for different virus, bacteria, and they would spend, you know, like $100,000 on these things before it was done. So, and it was a very cumbersome thing. And the way the process worked is basically you would go to your box. And here's an actual, like this is a little glass ampule, something like this. Okay.
right.
All right. So you would take that and you would put it on, you know, either the patient would hold it,
Mm-hmm.
is the way they actually did it for years. And they found later that they could hook up an aluminum plate to the electrode that the patient was holding, this brass cylinder thing that you all hold when you're being tested. And by the way, the old hand electrodes, you see how that's hollow there?
Yes.
Well, how they would do it is they would drop the ampules down in there and put their thumb over it. And that's, here, I'll do it so that the camera can see. So you would take this and drop it down in there and put your thumb over it to keep it there. And that's how they did the test. So kind of going back a little bit here, to start with, they would take what we call the baseline readings on the meridians
Mm-hmm.
to see which meridians were working properly and which weren't.
Right.
The meridians that were functioning properly in the green zone, they were done with those.
Right.
You know, they
Leave
didn't
them
need
alone.
to do anything with that.
Right.
Yeah, leave them alone. Don't need to fix something that's not
Move
broken.
it on. Yeah. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, please.
Exactly. So, but the ones that are in the red, you know, what they would do is they would start to test different ampules to figure out what was going on and also set up a therapy for that patient.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how did that equate to figuring out what was going on? Well, okay, so now we need to talk about briefly homeopathy. Homeopathy is a form of old school medicine where you take a substance and you dilute it in a very specific way. It's not just taking a drop of it and pouring it into a bottle of water and shaking. It's not quite like that, or stirring around. It's a very sequential process where you take one part, like a drop of, let's say, a known toxin,
Mm-hmm.
okay? And then you add that to 9 drops of a mixture of water and alcohol. The alcohol is just there to keep it stabilized so it doesn't spoil.
Right.
All right, now you take that and you pound it. It's called succussion. And that's a very important step in the process. That somehow embeds, you could say this is part of the rabbit hole, but you could say the energetic signature of that toxin onto the water molecules.
Right.
Now, just think of it this way. Think of it, it's kind of like the signature, the informational kind of nature, whatever that is, gets imparted to the water, not the chemistry.
Right.
You know, we're not trying to add this like molecularly to water. It's just somehow there's kind of like a description of this toxin gets kind of added to whatever water is.
I've always heard it's water with the memory of something. And
Again,
that actually kind of makes sense. Yeah. It's almost just the memory of said toxin in the water. If you look at it under a microscope, if you examine it chemically, like you say, there's no presence of anything but water. Yet
Agreed.
it's not water.
Yeah. So when you do that first step, 1 part with 9 parts, you have a total of 10 parts, one of them being the toxin, and then you pound it. That's called a 1x, 1 part per 10. So then you take a drop of that and you add it to 9 drops of water and alcohol, and then you pound that. Okay. Now it becomes 1 part per 100, and then 1 part per 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, and so on. So at a dilution, if you do this 9 times, is 1 part per billion. Now that's considered actually in the world of homeopathy a fairly low potency. Oddly enough, homeopathy, it becomes more powerful in terms of its message the more that it's diluted.
Yes.
It's kind of like you're amplifying that, you're adding that memory, as you put it, that information is kind of being compounded on there over and over and over again.
And it works deeper and deeper and deeper within the body.
Yes. Or, you know, all that and the above. Okay. Now, one thing to keep in mind with homeopathy and where science has an issue with it is it doesn't have so much a chemical effect unless it's very, very low potency, like a 1x, 1 part per 10. Well, sure, that's still a lot of the actual chemistry, or even 1 part per 100 or 1,000 or so on. But You start getting up to 1 part per billion, that's getting pretty diluted. Now, the effect of it is strictly informational in nature.
Right.
And so how does that actually work? Well, let's say that you've got somebody that, and allergies are a good example of this. So let's say you've got somebody that has an allergy to their cat.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So you could take a sample of the cat's hair, like a fair amount of clippings of it, and soak it in alcohol and kind of squeeze that out. And you would have what's called a mother tincture of cat hair.
The original.
Of that person's cat.
Right.
Of whatever, Muffy or whatever the cat's name. All right. So then you take that and then you start to sequentially dilute and then pound, succuss it step by step. Now, let's say you give that let's say you do it 23 times or something like that. So that's kind of a normal, like a 20x. So that'd be 20 times the dilution. That would be a number of 1 part per 10 with basically 20 zeros behind it. It's an extremely dilute amount.
Right.
So there's basically almost no cat hair in the solution, but there's kind of the memory of, like, that lingering, amplified, and also different than the original substance, different than the original cat hair in some way.
Right.
Still carries the message, but it's been kind of tweaked. Now you let that patient take that, and then all of a sudden it can cause the body to have a response. It doesn't do it chemically, it does it informationally. It causes the body to wake up and say, hey, you're dealing with this cat hair in this way. Why don't you try something else? This is
the inverse
your
of that.
Focus.
Yeah,
exactly. Why don't we not get so overreactive to cat hair? Which, you think about it, cat hair is not bad for you. I mean, it's not like cat hair is a toxin.
There's nothing inherently poisonous about it. It's the body's
like
response.
an orange. When people are allergic to oranges, are great for you, but people become allergic because of overexposure, whatever. All right.
Well, and that's what you've described is called Hahnemann's theory, and that's the whole basis of homeopathy, which is like cures like.
Like cures like, exactly. All right. And there's a whole science around this. And by the way, just one last little bit about that. In the 1800s, in the United States and in Europe, more than 50% of all the hospitals were homeopathy hospitals. There's a huge statue. There's a huge statue in Washington, D.C. of Samuel Hahnemann, the guy that invented this. So, I mean, modern science kind of shoved this to the backside. But now if you walk into your local drugstore, your Walgreens or, CVS or whatever, you'll see, oxalicinum or whatever it is right there next to the cash register. That's a homeopathic remedy for flu and cold symptoms.
Yeah.
All right. So it's kind of made its way back.
Yeah.
Well, the German practitioners used homeopathy to their advantage, and they created what are called no-sodes. These are homeopathic preparations of different causes of illness, heavy metals, aluminum, arsenic, lead, and so on, different pathogens, virus, bacteria, parasites, fungus, chemical toxins, allergic issues, all these things. And then they created these little test ampules to test with. And that's where these boxes, these somewhat flat, wide boxes with hundreds of these ampules, that's where it came from. So they created these test kits. Now, let's say that you're testing different virus. And let's say you test the liver meridian. It's got a very high reading.
Right.
And then let's say that you test, let's say, Epstein-Barr virus, and all of a sudden the reading comes down to where it's in balance, 50. And that's what happens when you find the right remedy or the right, what we call item or issue. The meridians somehow, and this is the most remarkable part about this technology, that, it's not the technology, it's the meridians are the key here. It's not the machine. The machine's relatively simple. But the meridians somehow can give you a response change in the reading on how that part of the body conducts electricity momentarily when you take another reading. So making this simple, you would take a reading on like the liver meridian point. It's on the big toe, on the inside of the big toe. Let's say you got a reading of 75, a high reading. Then you introduce an ampule of, one of these little guys here. And let's say this is an ampule of homeopathically prepared Epstein-Barr virus. Then you have the patient hold that, and you go back to the liver meridian point and you take another reading. Now, if the reading doesn't change,
it has no effects.
it has no effect. And so the general kind of way this works is if there's no change from the baseline reading, which was 75, then the answer is no. In other words, Epstein-Barr is a no. But let's say you try a different ampule, and this one's hepatitis C, this guy here. All right, so you have the patient hold it, and you go back to the liver meridian again, and you take another reading, and now it changes, substantially, gets closer to 50. The closer it is to 50, the stronger the yes answer.
Right.
When you see a significant change in the reading, down towards 50, or even in the opposite, but you see that change, the body's trying to communicate with you in a very, very simplistic but very powerful way. And who knows how they managed to pull it off, but the meridians somehow, in this network of information in your body, actually changes the electrical conductivity at that point. All right. Okay. And that gives you an answer. It tells you two things. It tells you, number one, that this remedy is going to help the patient get over their hepatitis C. But more importantly, it gives you kind of a good understanding of what might be the cause.
Right. So why isn't this in hospitals everywhere?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of reasons.
Yeah. Obviously there's no drug attached to it. And
well, you just said it. There's your answer right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the things is, why is this meaningful? How does this work? And I love the way that you explain it. And I think that that's a really good description of how it works within our body, even though like the way that I do it day to day, I don't always do that. I'm doing the single point testing and I get great information and I know how to go find, causal features of it. Now, are we diagnosing? Absolutely not.
Well, and you think about it, you're not. I mean, it's not like we have an actual hardcore physical evidence to prove this. We don't have, a tissue sample, a biopsy that shows that toxin, or a cultured sample of a pathogen or anything like that. It's not a true diagnosis.
But to complement traditional diagnosis or people's traditional testing, like lab work or imaging that you get within a healthcare setting, there's still value to this type of testing, because how many people, go to the doctor, they've got an infection, they get their antibiotic and it doesn't go away.
Well, it might go away for a little while.
Or it goes away
for a little while. The underlying issue is still there and it has to be addressed.
And this is a great way to gather information to go, well, what else is going on? Yeah, there's this infection, but why was that infection able to take hold or happen at all? Or, are your emotions playing into this? And that's one of the other really cool features about your system, is just the ability to kind of delve into non-physical features of our health.
Yeah. So you kind of address one thing that I was always attracted to. This one thing, I was attracted to a lot of things about this technology when I came across it and started developing my own machine. But one of the things was the practitioners that were using this were trying to get down to the cause, to the root cause of the problem, not just dealing with symptoms. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of the story about when the person comes into the doctor and he says, "Doc, my foot hurts." And he goes, "Really?" "Yeah." "Well, here, take this, take some ibuprofen, And the guy comes back and he goes, "Yeah, I feel a little bit better, but it still kind of hurts." And he says, "Well, why don't you try a different one? Why don't you try an Aleve instead, or, whatever, Tylenol." And he says, "Yeah, they all work kind of, but it still kind of hurts." And the guy says, "Hang on a second." And he takes the guy's shoe off and there's a rock in it. And he finally takes the rock out of the shoe and he goes, "How about now?" And he goes, "Oh, now I feel a whole lot better." So, it's getting down to what's really causing the problem.
Yeah, right. Which we, often miss the boat here. So that's,
Well, and again, one thing that's kind of unsettling about a lot of medicine today, it's a lot about symptom management instead of really getting down to the root cause and dealing with that.
Yes, agreed. And when you don't pay attention to the superficial symptoms and you just suppress, the body will often start developing deeper rooted or deeper seated symptoms. And
absolutely.
And on it goes. Okay.
All
I
right.
love
Well,
that.
hang on a second.
What?
Well, I apologize. What were you going to say?
No, go for it. I want to hear whatever it is you have to say.
Well, something that I kind of left out was about how the machine itself actually physically works.
Oh, good, because that's what I was actually asking.
All right. So the machine itself is actually a device that measures electrical current, which is amperage, and electrical potential, which is called voltage. It measures electricity. All right. And you have two parts. You have this thing called the point probe, which is what the practitioner holds this and then takes measurements on the different meridian points. And then the patient holds the other side of what we call the electrical circuit, the hand electrode. There you go. Got it. So basically, the electricity flows. It actually flows from the hand electrode down the cable on the hand electrode through the patient's, through their hand, up their arm, through their body, and then over to where you make contact with the point probe. Right. Now, the machine is very, very precise, like 6 digits out precise. It emits a certain amount of voltage. Voltage is kind of like the amount of, it's how big the hammer is you're pushing the electricity in with. And here we're just using a little tack hammer. It's hardly anything. It's 1.5 volts. If you hold the ends of a AA battery, or even like this little guy here, that's 1.5 volts going through me. I don't even feel it. Right. I guarantee you could hook up a meter and it's going through you. But it's almost nothing. Okay. Now, what happens is we know how much electricity is going in, and the amount of amperage current is kind of what's allowed by the body. It's just how much of that flow of electricity, that's amperage, actually is going through you. And then we know how much we started off with. We measure it on the back end after it's done kind of going through you. So the machine is just a meter, really.
Right.
And the difference between what went in to start with and what comes out at the on the way back around, we measure that difference, and that can be called either resistance, or the inverse of that is conductivity. And that's what we really look at, is how conductive is that electrical circuit. And it turns out that when you measure acupuncture meridian points, they are far more conductive than the tissue around them. Even as much as just like a quarter or a half an inch away, the conductivity can be double where that meridian point is. Okay. So that's how the machine works.
Love it. So
oftentimes, hang on a second. Let me add one thing so I don't forget it. Oftentimes people will say this, even the practitioners using this, they'll say, well, the machine says. The machine says this and this and this. The machine doesn't say anything.
The machine is reflecting.
Well, all the machine does is just give you a conductivity reading where you're measuring it. That's it.
It's a measurement device.
Yeah, that's all it does. It doesn't do anything more than that. It doesn't have any frequencies attached to it. That's all kind of lame stories that were developed about this. It's really just a meter. That's all it is.
Yes.
Okay? But when it's done properly, when it's calibrated properly, when it's used in this way with the right kind of electrodes and so on, and you're testing the right points in the right way correctly, then we get an understanding of how it shows up on that screen. Is it in the green zone, the red zone? Then the practitioner makes the judgment call on, is this an inflammatory reading, and so on. And what's actually saying that it's inflammatory? It's the patient's body is. It's the patient's body, their meridian system is showing that change in response. It's saying, hey, something's going on here. It's a high reading. Or when you add a remedy, we get a change in reading. It's the patient's body that's really giving all the information, all the answers.
Right.
We just have a tool that lets us communicate with that.